For today, we're playing Hogwarts Legacy with the ROG Ally, and we'll start it off at 1080p at a mix of medium, low and high settings. It's mainly medium, but still, let's get into it, and hit me up with that. For our TDP, we're using 15 watts, and for the VRAM, I'm using 4 gigs. I did try playing with 6 gigs, and sadly the game was just far too stuttery and far too choppy to be playable. And at 4 gigs, it does stutter here and there still, but it is far more playable. So yeah, in Hogsmeade we're sitting at 20 FPS pretty much, but overall it's not too bad considering we have no FSR active. It's playing the game at full native 1080p and at the medium settings. So yeah, it's doing a decent job I guess. Playing at 15 watts will be tricky, but I think at 720p with FSR active, the game should be able to hit at least 30 FPS. Alright, here we go. Going near the forest. FPS is falling quite a bit, so now it's 16, 15. Yeah, around there pretty much. Okay, let's fly away and back to the castle and see if the FPS goes up at all. So far, we're sitting at 12 FPS here. That is awful. And back up to 16 and 17 FPS. So let's back out, enable FSR, and go from there. And for the upscaler, we're using FSR 2 at the balance preset. And back to Hogsmeade. So far in the high 20s, guys. There we go, look at that. That is honestly pretty good. We gained, what, around 10 FPS pretty much from before. And for the graphics, it looks identical to what we had before. So for me, I would keep FSR enabled at all times at this res. It looks amazing, and the FPS gains are definitely worth it. Now in saying that, the FPS still falls below 30 into the mid-20s. But overall, it's a pretty good increase. So let's go ahead and get out of here, fly back to the Forbidden Forest, and see how bad the FPS falls there. Okay, we're getting some stutters here. I'm not surprised though, this game isn't the most stable. And up here, we're sitting in the mid-20s, and occasionally down into the low 20s. But I think at 900p, it will be much better. I'm gonna guess probably the mid to high 20s in this section, and I think on average, probably the low 30s. Okay, let's go and fly back to the castle, and then back out, play at 30 watts, and come back in. Here we go, flying back in. And yeah, the low 20s. Cool, let's back out. Play at 30 watts, try again. Back to Hogsmeade at 30 watts. And so far in the mid 40s, okay. That's pretty good. But yeah, not too bad in this section. Let's fly away and go back to the Forbidden Forest and see if 30 FPS is possible at all. Alright, I'm still too far in, like always. Our TDP has gone up to 40 watts again. That's interesting. So far guys, at 1080p, this is a pretty good experience, I would say. It's definitely playable, but I think realistically, I would cap the FPS at 30 here. As you guys can see, in the forest, it's still falling way below into the low 30s. So you're having the FPS fall from the 40s all the way down to the 30s. It's pretty annoying, and it doesn't feel good. So a stable 30 is a much better experience, and overall a better time. Let's go and fly back to the castle, and then I'll exit out and lower the resolution and come back in. And yeah, near the castle, it's sitting in the mid 30s and the high 30s. So a bit better than the forest. Now playing at 900p at 15 watts and no FSR. And inside of Hogsmeade, so far in the mid to low 30s. And for the graphics, it's pretty damn good. So you're not really missing out on much by playing at a lower resolution. Now at 720p, there's definitely a downgrade in terms of sharpness, but at 900p, it's basically identical. So if you're playing on the Ally screen, there's not really much point in playing at a higher resolution as they both look very nice. And flying up on the broom, the FPS falls down into the low 20s and at times even below it. So yeah, FSR is definitely a must. And in the forest, again, the same situation. FPS falls down to like 16 FPS or 17 FPS on average, and it's not playable at all. So yeah, let's back out guys, enable FSR and try it again. Yep, FPS is definitely better in the mid to high 20s now instead of the low 20s and below it at times. And flying into the forest, FPS falls down into the mid 20s and even the low 20s. So yeah, a decent FPS jump, but sadly not good enough. And for the graphics guys, again with FSR active, the game looks identical to before. It's very sharp and it looks quite good. Now playing on a bigger screen though, there might be a difference there, but on the Ally screen, it looks fantastic. It's time for 30 watts, and as you guys can see, our GPU is being held back in Hogsmeade. Our usage is down to 90% instead of being fully pinned, and FPS wise, we're sitting in the 50s. So yeah, it's quite good obviously, and definitely playable, but our GPU is being bottlenecked here in this section. But luckily in the forest, the GPU should be fully maxed out at all times. So you're flying up, FPS falls down into the 40s, and the GPU is now fully maxed out at 99%. Flying into the forest, does the FPS fall even further? And it seems to be fine in the forest. It's sitting in the high 30s and the low 40s on average. So yeah, for me, if I'm plugged in, I'm playing at 40 FPS with these settings and this resolution. It looks very sharp, and the overall graphics are pretty good as well. But what about if you're playing unplugged and on battery? Let's back out, play at 720p, and try again. Now lastly, playing at 720p, and back down to 15 watts with FSR active as well. And so far guys, the game does look quite nice. It's not as good as before obviously, but it's close enough I think. So if you're playing portably, this might be an option for you. Let's fly up on the broom and fly to the forest and see if the FPS falls below 30 at all. So far guys, ooh, it's the high 20s and the low 30s. Okay, it's not too bad. It's definitely doing a decent job, I would say. Again, use a 30 FPS cap here, and the game should run quite well. So yeah, it does fall below 30 FPS at times, but in the forest, overall, it does hold a stable 30. I think this is pretty close to the Steam Deck in terms of performance, which is shocking, because the Ally normally does much better. But yeah, 15 watts, it is sitting at 30 FPS. Okay, let's back out, play at 30 watts, and see if 60 FPS is doable at all. And for 30 watts in Hogsmeade, FPS is sitting in the 60s and almost the 70s at times. Now I think in the forest it will fall down below this, but overall it should be close enough that the experience shouldn't be impacted too much at all. FPS so far is sitting in the 60s and the high 50s. Wow, that is surprising. And there we go, falling down into the low to mid 50s here near the forest. And yeah, in the forest it's sitting in the mid 40s and the low 40s. So we lost around 20 FPS from the outside to the inside of the forest. So yeah, that's Hogwarts Legacy with the ROG Ally. There's a lot of options here. If you're playing portably, then play at 720p at 15 watts, and you should get a mostly 30 FPS experience. If you're playing plugged in, then play at 900p and should be sitting in the 40s on average and enjoy a sharper looking game. And lastly, playing in dock mode, I would play at 1080p and target 30 FPS with the same settings. So yeah, that's about it guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time for the next video. See you guys there.